Hi everybody, we're going to be talking about notes from 7 Common Core Lesson 3.3 today. We're going to be solving equations using addition and subtraction, and the goal of our lesson is to isolate the variable. By isolating the variable, you find the value of x or whatever variable we're using. We're also going to be using equivalent equations, and those are simply equations that are written in a different form that have the same solution. All right, so in our first example, in our examples 1, 2, and 3, we are going to be solving these simply using algebra. Any other method isn't necessarily going to work when we start using more rational numbers as well as positive and negative. So even though you may be able to look at this and solve it in your head, I'm going to require solving it using algebra so you can use that strategy to solve more difficult problems that you can't do in your head. They're going to include distributive property, decimals and fractions, that sort of thing. So in our first example, number 1, z minus 2/3 is equal to negative 1/2. The goal is to isolate the variable, so I need to figure out how to get z all by itself. So right here, I literally can go ahead and create an equivalent expression, and that's going to be z is being added to negative 2/3, and then I get negative 1/2. So in order to get z by itself, I need to get rid of this negative 2/3. So I'm going to go ahead and do the opposite of negative 2/3, which is adding 2/3. If I add 2/3 on both sides, negative 2/3 and 2/3 are pretty much a zero pair. They're going to cancel each other out. I'm left with z is equal to whatever negative 1/2 plus 2/3 are. If that's something you can't do in your head, doodle it to the side. So I'm going to go ahead and I know I'm having a negative and a positive. I know that the answer is going to be positive because I have more positives. And I'm going to subtract, which means I'm going to have to switch the order of them. So I'm really doing 2/3 minus 1/2. I need common denominators, which is 6. So I have 4/6 minus 3/6, which ends up equaling 1/6. After we go ahead and solve, something that you can go ahead and do is actually literally plug it in. So is 1/6, which is the same as 1/6 plus negative 2/3 equal to negative 1/2? You could go ahead and do that where 1/6 plus negative 4/6 is equal to negative 3/6, so you know it works. So don't forget about that check to see if your answer actually makes sense. For this one, I'm also trying to isolate the variable. In this case, it's w. The opposite of 13 and 2/10 would be negative 13 and 2/10. So it's being added, so I'm going to add the opposite in order for it to cancel out. Okay. So now I'm just left with w on this side, and now I have, I'm subtracting because I have one positive, one negative. I may need to doodle to the side, 13.2 minus 10.4. Some of you may need to go through these steps all by yourself, or some you can do it in your head. I end up with equaling w equals negative 2.8. I know my answer is negative because the larger value is negative. In example 3, 5 is on the same side as the variable x, so I need to eliminate this negative 5. The way I'm going to do that is I'm going to add 5. Remembering that I'm going to be doing what I do to one side, I'm doing to the other side. I'm left with x over there, and then I can simply just add this because there's nothing in terms of like terms or mixed numbers. As you go ahead and look down, you can go ahead and see that format and how I set the problems are going to be really important, especially when you have larger equations. All of these can be checked by plugging back in to evaluate, and I highly recommend you do that to see if you got the right answer or not. So when we're solving equations using addition and subtraction, the goal is to isolate the variable. Create equivalent equations in order to solve them. You have to be using algebra, and I typically do it underneath. If you want to do it next to it, that's totally fine. In my mind, underneath works better. And it doesn't matter what side the variable's on, you're going to do the opposite to go ahead and isolate it. Thanks, guys. Have a good one.